The largest deportation operation in the history of our country.
These are the criminal migrants that Kamala Harris brought into your community.
And for the first time, military planes are making deportation flights. Migrants in restraint seen boarding a flight to Guatemala.
Trump is preparing to deport millions of undocumented immigrants, but he might have an ulterior motive. Most illegal immigrants at some point crossed the US southern border, but the number of people who illegally crossed significantly decreased since the late 1990s. But over that same period, the number of undocumented immigrants in the US more than tripled. They now number at least 5% of the entire US labor force. Almost a quarter of all construction workers in Texas is undocumented, as well as 50% of all farm workers nationwide. But as a businessman, would Trump really deport such a tremendous source of cheap labor?
Is it your plan to deport everyone who is here illegally?
This is why Trump really wants mass deportation with hindsight.
I will seal the border, stop the invasion, and send Joe Biden's illegal aliens the hell back home.
In the entire world, the number of undocumented immigrants is believed to range between 30 and 40 million people, about 14 of which are believed to live in the United States. For comparison, Canada is only believed to host between 20 and 200,000 undocumented immigrants. Most entered the country at the southern border. The western section of this border runs through hundreds of miles of desert, and the eastern section follows the Rio Grande River until it reaches the Gulf. To understand Trump's strategy with deportation, we must first look at border security. In the 1990s, crossing the southern border wasn't so difficult. Mexican workers would travel back and forth to do seasonal work, and the risk of apprehension was slim.
And you always snuck across the border?
Yes, every 5 months I'll go down to Mexico and come back.
Until in Mexico, the economy collapsed, and almost overnight, the number of illegal crossings quadrupled.
Everyone you see in these films is on U.S. territory.
The United States border is divided in 9 sectors, of which San Diego at that time was the largest. Here, there are 3 main points of entry from Tijuana, but most undocumented immigrants would simply walk across the border at Imperial Beach. This beach accounted for nearly a quarter of all illegal crossings into the United States. But other sectors were also struggling. In El Paso, there was a 15-fold increase of illegal crossings, and they decided to try something new. Instead of focusing on finding people who had already crossed, they started focusing on intercepting migrants at the border. They built walls. They increased the number of agents, and within weeks, the number of crossings had dropped to previous levels. This marked a turning point. The new strategy became prevention through deterrence. Make it so difficult and dangerous to cross that people would be discouraged from trying. The number of illegal crossings dropped by 75% between 2000 and 2020. But this was not the only result. Many immigrants who had already crossed the border would now no longer return to Mexico and risk being arrested. This helped give rise to the largest unauthorized immigrant population in the world. And this is when the US started deporting more people. Clinton deported 870,000, Bush 2 million, and Obama 3.2 million. But this is nothing compared to Trump's pledge to deport each and every one of them. But before we get into that, a quick word from my sponsor. So, it is not just the US southern border that is becoming increasingly militarized. In response to this new Red Cold War, defense expenditure of NATO Europe rose from 1.7 to 2%. But which companies look poised to benefit? Today's sponsor, US Global Investors, is a team of investment specialists based in Texas who have created a new ETF focusing on 4 key sectors: cybersecurity, semiconductors, aerospace and defense, and data centers. The ETF primarily includes US defense companies and emphasizes AI in aerospace and defense, which some analysts predict will more than double over the next decade. The team uses Smart Beta 2.0 portfolio design, and they prioritize portfolio construction and stock picking options to target those companies that stand to benefit from these rising defense budgets. And this includes the role of artificial intelligence in retooling the military. The ETF rebalances and reconstitutes every quarter. If you want to know more, scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the pinned comment or description. And now, let's go back to the video. During Trump's first term in office, he pledged to build the wall. He built 450 miles or 725 kilometers of wall, most of which replaced structures that were built under Bush. This is in line with the strategy Prevention through Deterrence. Walls can help border security channel illegal crossings into areas that are more manageable for them to patrol, but critics argue that it's inhumane. It forces already vulnerable people to cross in dangerous areas. And under Trump, stories broke about kids in cages and families that were separated. This is what Biden wanted to do differently.
For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it.
Biden, in the beginning, took a more humanitarian approach. He ended many of Trump's restrictive policies, he focused on reuniting families, and he sent aid to Central American countries to address some of the root causes of immigration. But the number of illegal crossings during each of his 4 years in office reached record heights.
The sheer numbers of people are so troubling.
Prevention through deterrence makes the border more dangerous. The number of fatalities increased during those years that the border was militarized, despite crossings going down over that same period. But under Biden, officials recorded the 4 deadliest years on record.
They were ordered to push the migrants, including the children, back into the Rio Grande.
The left blamed strict border security.
We know about 42 terrorists.
The right blamed Biden's policies, but together it led to the number of undocumented immigrants to increase to over 14 million people by 2025. Data from a few years ago suggests that more than half of all undocumented immigrants in the United States has been in the country for over a decade. But these figures have now likely skewed.
And you remember when they say, no, these are migrants. They don't commit crimes like us. No. They make our criminals look like babies. These are stone cold killers. They'll walk into your kitchen, they'll cut your throat.
Trump framed these immigrants as criminals and poison.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison mental institutions.
And when he was elected, his officials announced the initial goal of deporting 1 million undocumented immigrants per year. And these plans carried broad public support. An AP poll found that the policy of deporting all immigrants living in the United States illegally was supported by 43% of respondents, whereas the public was more divided on specific policy issues, except on crime. 82% of people support deporting immigrants convicted of a violent crime. That's how Trump started. There are over 400,000 non-citizens with a criminal record, with offenses ranging from traffic violations to homicides. In general, undocumented immigrants are far less likely to be arrested for an offense. Legal immigrants are twice as likely, and US citizens are even more likely than that to commit a crime.
ICE arrested 1,179 undocumented immigrants on Sunday, but nearly half of them appear to have no prior criminal record.
The president has said countless times on the campaign trail, I've been with him at the rallies, I know you've been there covering them too, Peter, that he is focused on launching the largest mass deportation operation in American history of illegal criminals. And if you are an individual, a foreign national, who illegally enters the United States of America, you are, by definition, a criminal.
During Trump's first days in office, he posted daily tweets of undocumented immigrants who had been convicted of horrendous crimes and who were now being deported. But to fulfill his pledge of deporting 1 million illegal immigrants per year, he will need to eventually expand his focus. This opens a debate about how undocumented immigrants affect the nation. In some sectors, undocumented immigrants do take jobs from American people, especially those with lower levels of education. But they also take jobs that few Americans are willing to take for a wage that keeps American products affordable. We also have some evidence that undocumented immigrants have increased the cost of living in some areas, but they also help keep construction costs down, which extends to the cost of a house. Whether you are concerned about how they affect the job market, cost of living, national security, the safety of your neighborhood, or the cost to society, or maybe you're concerned about their well-being, you don't want them to be exploited, exposed to dangerous work conditions, or wage theft. There are compelling arguments that resonate with both sides of the aisle to address the fact that 14 million people are currently residing in the country without legal status. In hindsight, I think that Trump's emphasis on deportation is in line with the historical trend towards more severe enforcement action. But the difference is that whereas previous deportations happened primarily at the border, Trump is now going after people who are already living in the country.
So this is why Trump often draws parallels with Eisenhower, who in the 1950s he deported hundreds of thousands of Mexicans, and these were not people who were illegally crossing the border. These were people who were living in the country, and he used the military to deport them, and a lot of really terrible things happened. And that got me thinking, because maybe Trump wants people to fear of what he might be willing to do. That would be classic prevention for deterrence. But a shortcoming of this strategy is that it can really lead to harrowing situations for families that are targeted. This should be an ongoing debate, and I want to hear from you in the comments. While you are there, make sure to also subscribe to the channel. It really doesn't take much time and it helps out a lot.